Meanwhile, it's time to check in once again, as we do periodically, with the Assistant City Manager in Battle Creek, Ted Deering, who's with us this half hour. Good morning, Ted.
Hey, good morning. How are you this morning?
Great. Thanks for coming today.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
We like to try and check in on occasion and see how things are going with development efforts downtown and in the region. And there's been chatter on a number of levels, so it seems like an appropriate time to do that. How are you feeling about things today?
Well, that's a good question, and based on some of our previous conversations that we've had here, that this is both an exciting time and a somewhat anxious time in the downtown as we transition several key properties from long-term vacant status to productive parts of the downtown landscape.
Sure.
And we were calculating yesterday that we've got 8 key vacant buildings in the downtown, and right now we have either purchase options or have sold 7 of those 8 buildings.
Boy, that's a pretty good average.
That's very good, yeah. So we're excited about that, but yet most of those projects are kind of in the due diligence phase or in the financing phase, and so we're just anxious that they'll be what we hope that they can be. We're confident that they will be, but we're in that period of transition, so we're still saying to folks, hey, hang in there because things are going to turn around very soon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if we talk just generally about what's involved in this process, so you have these buildings, you got to find an interested party, then you do, and at this point then they have to have all of their commitments lined up, and I suppose if there's any place on which we could get snagged, it might happen in this phase.
Yeah,
right?
and that's exactly when it happens too, because you start out with difficult things right off the bat, like say environmental, for example.
Sure.
And you end up doing a phase 1, and then the next thing you know, you're doing a phase 2, and then you got to move into a BEA to protect the buyer. And okay, so that just took 60 days. And then you start the financing process, and you look at complicated projects like, say, Heritage Tower, for example. You might have 7 or 8 levels of financing involved in a project like that, and you might be working on 2, 3, and then you're on 4 and 5, and it looks like no progress where progress is being made, but it takes a lot of time.
To the average Battle Creeker walking by, they're not seeing that.
Yeah,
they're just seeing the building. Yeah.
They're seeing an empty building that continues to deteriorate, and that can be very frustrating, and we understand that. But we also understand how complicated these projects can be. And the good news is, we're checking in with our developers on a regular basis. We were talking to these folks weekly, and we understand if progress is going on or it isn't going on. And if we're not seeing progress, then we have to look for a plan B. But in all of these cases, we see the progress. We see what's happening with the project, even though it's not very visual if you walk by the building. So again, we've got every reason to be optimistic about where we are. So
you talked about 7 of the 8. What's the latest in that 8 that we can talk about here?
Yeah, okay. So the most recent, it's always difficult to share a lot of details on these because we like the developers to be able to tell their own story, obviously. But 50 West Michigan, which has been a problem property for us for quite a while, a lot of square footage. Depending on how long you've been in the community, you might think of it as Office Ways, you might think of it as J.C. Penney in the old day, and just in a very large building, a great open space, but a real challenge for redevelopment. But we've got some local folks who have a vision for that building that I think is absolutely incredible. At this point, they're getting ready to move to a purchase option on that building.
Okay.
They're engaging architects, and they've got a business plan in place that looks very viable, and a couple of potential partners. And it looks really good, and it's the kind of development, again, although I can't share a lot of details, it's the kind of development that can and will have a major impact on the downtown. A kind of use that we haven't seen in this community that could build a lot of excitement.
Ooh. Yeah. Okay, we're intrigued. We'll come back in a minute with Ted Deering from the city of Battle Creek on WBCK 8:30. Ted Deering is here, Assistant City Manager, City of Battle Creek. Boy, you brought a flashback to my mind thinking about the idea of a J.C. Penney in a downtown. Boy, those days are over. Those big box retailer days in downtown environments, just it's not part of the plan anymore.
No, it really isn't. And we tend to refer to those types of facilities as regional retail. And they have very specific development criteria, and those are the kind of locations where they want you to come off the highway and make one turn and be in their parking lot. And that's the way they envision their business model. And So, corridors like the Beckley Road corridor are
Sure.
where those types of facilities tend to locate. Which, okay, we understand that. We think of downtown differently now. We think of it as having a different set of amenities. And I think a community like ours, particularly a large geographic community like ours, could actually have both experiences. We can have a regional retail quarter like
Mm-hmm.
Beckley Road, and then we can have a unique and vibrant downtown as well. So we don't really see those as competing with each other. We recognize certain types of businesses are going to go in one location and not the other. So you just make the best of that and develop each of those locations with a unique character that's specific to that type of a shopper or user experience.
I guess the other thing with the J.C. Penney types of the world is not only do they want one turn, but they want 300 parking spaces
Well,
outside the
exactly,
door or
yeah.
something. Yeah.
And downtowns are intended to be, a much more denser urban experience
Yep.
these days. Young people prefer to be in walkable environments, close to amenities like bars and restaurants and entertainment. And that's not the kind of thing that really necessarily is suited to a large retail quarter like Beckley Road,
Mm-hmm.
which we don't necessarily think of as being walkable like a downtown.
Right.
So you can have, again, two very different experiences, and both can be successful.
So is that the business model then when you think about development in these 8 spaces, for example, that's what we're thinking about, some kind of walkable restaurant entertainment kind of venue.
Yeah, very much a mixed use type of scenario where you've got residential living very close to commercial, retail, restaurant, etc. You want to be able to walk down a set of stairs to go to the bar or to the restaurant or down the sidewalk as opposed to jumping in your vehicle and driving to a destination location. And those are the choices that we see, the younger generation making.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, downtowns, to be honest with you, that's why they're viable again. That's why there's opportunity there once again, as there used to be many years ago.
Definition has changed
Yes.
based on the needs. Well, and you don't have to go too far, I suppose, to see a little of that. Kalamazoo, Royal Oak, Plymouth, Grand Rapids. And I don't know if you've ever been to Omaha, Nebraska. Their downtown is like that. Who's the national example that folks look to for downtowns now and say, "Yep, that's it"?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of examples of very large, much larger cities. Like San Antonio is a classic example.
There you go.
Portland. But we don't have to look very far here. I mean, you look at what's going on in both Grand Rapids and Detroit. Where there's been a huge emphasis on residential development that creates that critical mass in the downtown that drives all of the retail and the commercial. I think the mistake is to think that you can be successful with commercial and retail if you don't have that critical mass. You can't really do that piece first. And until we activate some residential, of course, is what we're working hard on.
Right.
Most of these projects that we've talked about, these 8 buildings, most of them are mixed-use developments with a heavy emphasis on residential. So we're trying to build that critical mass so that there's people there during the day and there's people there at night. And that's what drives a successful retail commercial environment in a downtown.
Talk about the residential piece of that. What's more popular, renting or buying?
Well, right now, renting is.
Okay.
I think we've got to get an inventory of rental opportunities on the market in the downtown with the hopes that at some point then people will see enough viability there that they would be willing to invest, maybe purchase a condo or something like that. But right now we need to concentrate on rental units.
And we don't have enough of them.
We do not have it. We don't have any of them, to be very realistic. I mean,
Yeah.
we've got just a very small handful. We've got a very successful, Battle Creek Tower here in town that stays full. I mean, so we've got a model that proves that there can be some success doing this. We need to, but we just need a whole lot more of that.
Ted Deering is here, City of Battle Creek, as we talk about downtown development. Back in just a moment with more. First, okay, Ted Deering is here from the City of Battle Creek, Assistant City Manager, focused on downtown development. Interesting point. We were just talking off the air here a second. You don't have to be in a big metropolis for this example to work. For example, you don't have to be in Chicago or Detroit or someplace huge.
Yeah, we tend to think of those as the models for this type of development, but the truth is you can see this kind of activity in very small towns like Hastings, Michigan, where they've had some success bringing some residential online. And I think it appeals to obviously it appeals to young folks, it appeals to professionals who are starting their career, but it appeals to the natives as well. And so, there's no reason that this can't be successful in Battle Creek.
We talk about that residential component and trying to build that up downtown. Is part of what you're talking about now does that involve some interest among those who might wish to be landlords with downtown properties?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it's been very difficult for the traditional developers in our communities to see a successful vision for what a mixed-use development might look like in a downtown. But again, what's really changing that is people are making different choices now. And we're starting to see, I mean, if you look at most of the projects, again, that we've referenced here regarding those 8 buildings, all of those are being driven, with the exception of one, by local developers who are kind of making their first foray into a mixed-use development with residential and commercial retail in a downtown setting. So, the market's starting to shift. We've got developers who are recognizing that and are now willing to, take a chance on that type of a development in our city core. So, for us, we need our local developers to be first to market. And then when that happens and outsiders can see a little bit of success, then they're going to say, hey, Battle Creek looks like an exciting place to do business.
Something's
and they'll be
there.
here as well.
Yeah. Well, we all know by now fairly recently, that the Battle Creek Unlimited vision and your vision have separated, in the sense that you're focused on downtown. Battle Creek Unlimited is now focused on a broader picture. But they did report recently a snapshot in time progress report that showed some investment, but still some jobs being lost. What's your reaction when you look at that from where you sit?
Yeah. And again, if you're familiar with the BC Vision process, for example, and how we've defined an ecosystem for our community with components such as leveraging our community core competencies, the education piece, workforce development, and this notion of a culture of vitality, BCU has a very specific role in that, dealing with large business and some of our more important community competencies like aviation and aerospace, manufacturing, logistics, etc. So I think when we look at BCU today, they're a critically important organization to our community to do a certain type of economic development. It takes a high skill set, a lot of knowledge, and a lot of relationship building. And I think that where they're focused now on large business, and particularly in the industrial park, is exactly where we need them. The city needs to build some capacity to provide some other economic development services in the downtown and in other key commercial parts of our community. But what Battle Creek Unlimited is doing is a different level of economic development that's critically important to this community. It's a bit of a volume business. There's going to be some job gain, and there's occasionally going to be some job loss. But I think that organization is as strong as ever. I think what they're doing complements what we're doing, and we found a way to make it work to meet our needs kind of across a very broad spectrum.
Sure. And, looking at the progress that's being made is kind of like looking at your bank balance. I mean, you can open up your bank balance today and say, well, I have $5 in the checking account, but I just paid the house payment and the car payment and the consumer's energy bill and, all that stuff. And so it makes sense. You put it in context. But if you just look at it and say, oh, man, there's $5 in my checking account, that doesn't make you feel good. But so that snapshot in time picture that Battle Creek Unlimited gives you from certain periods of time, you look at that and you say, well, we lost some jobs, but tomorrow it might be different.
Well, it's a little bit like the stock market. I mean, let's look at it that way.
Right.
What does my what does my investment look like over 10 or 20 years versus what it looks like on any given day when the market had a bad day? And all you have to do is drive into the industrial park and say, okay, over the last 20 years, I think this has gone pretty well. If you look at any one given day, it might be the day right after WKW decides to close their facility.
Right.
And so you can't let that color your picture of what success has looked like and does look like out there in that industrial park. So you're right. I mean, at any given point in time, you can be a little bit discouraged, but if you look at the body of work, you would have to be very encouraged.
And the challenge might be then those with whom you're working to develop buildings in downtown might look at that and say, well, I don't know about this. And so they have to manage their expectations too, right?
They do, yeah. I mean, there's obviously risk with all of this. And, the dynamics in the community, are important. I mean, these developers are looking at what's going on. But fortunate for us, we've got a couple of assets in the downtown, in the Kellogg Company and the Kellogg Foundation and other professional folks who work in that downtown area who would like to live there. That provide a market incentive that maybe a lot of other communities might not have. So we haven't found a way to leverage that yet. We're working on it.
Do you have a sense of where how long you'd like it to be before you can say, here's a model of an apartment in downtown that you can go look at.
Yeah, now I would hope that we would have, I think the first project that's on the docket that's probably the closest to potential completion is what we call the old Carlisle building that faces the river. It's a residential development that 180 Urban is engaged in.
Right.
And that project is moving fairly quickly. And I think that we'll probably see some construction yet this year and some completed units, fairly soon. So I would guess that's probably where we're going to see it first.
Okay.
And that's great. We like that again because that's a residential component, and that helps us build kind of that critical mass that we need in the downtown. So.
And we presume that kind of development would be a middle income sort of development?
It will be market rate, what we
Okay.
refer to as a market rate, which means, depending on the square footage and the size, you're going to be, it's the kind of place that's probably going to appeal to a young professional,
Okay.
who, has the income to pay a market rate rent as opposed to, like, say, affordable housing.
Right.
But we envision, and our developers envision, too, kind of a mix of all of those uses, affordable, market rate, and strategic ways throughout the downtown, so that everybody has an opportunity to take advantage of downtown success.
All right. We'll leave it there. Ted Deering, we always appreciate the time. Thank you.
Always good to be here. Thank you.
8:30.